Good evening, George Will here. Breaking news tonight, and the first duty of a serious commentator is to separate the headline from the record because the public evidence does not show Buckingham Palace unveiling some brand new prosecutorial dossier this evening. What the public record does show, with exact dates and institutional confirmation, is that Buckingham Palace launched an internal human resources investigation on March 3, 2021, after allegations about Meghan's treatment of staff were reported, and by June 29th and 30 of 2022, the palace confirmed that the review had been completed, that recommendations had been taken forward, and that the findings would remain private. That matters because in establishment affairs, concealment is often as significant as disclosure. The palace did not say nothing happened. The palace said lessons were learned. The palace did not deny the process existed. The palace said an outside legal team was used. And the palace did not publish a report clearing anyone in public. It kept the conclusions behind the wall of confidentiality. That is not gossip, that is institutional fact. Before this goes further, viewers who value document-based analysis over palace melodrama should subscribe now because the point of this channel is not to inflame but to verify, and what follows rests on named institutions, dated statements, and language the palace itself placed into circulation. The evidence is unusually clean. First, Buckingham Palace stated on March 3, 2021, that it was very concerned and that its HR team would look into the circumstances outlined in the article, while adding that the royal household has had a dignity at work policy in place for a number of years and does not and will not tolerate bullying or harassment in the workplace. Second, multiple major outlets independently recorded the same essential facts. BBC, Reuters, AP, and CNN each reported the launch of the review, the palace language, and Meghan's denial. Third, Reuters later reported that the review was privately funded, carried out by an independent law firm, and described by Sir Michael Stevens, the keeper of the Privy Purse, as complete, with recommendations taken forward. Fourth, BBC confirmed that past and present employees were invited to contribute, that those involved were informed of the outcome, and that confidentiality was the rationale for withholding publication. Fifth, CNN reported that Meghan's side described the allegations as a calculated smear campaign and said a legal letter of rebuttal had been sent. So the architecture here is not rumor against rumor. It is allegation, formal institutional response, outside review, private outcome, and continued dispute. That is the chain of custody for tonight's story. Then come the 6 categories of evidence that define the case. The first category is the official record. March 3, 2021 for the launch, June 29th and 30, 2022 for the completion, an explicit palace acknowledgement that policy changes followed. The second category is the complaint architecture itself. Reporting summarized by Reuters, AP, BBC, and CNN said a senior aide had raised concerns in October 2018, alleging that 2 personal assistants were driven from the household and a third staff member's confidence was undermined. The third category is procedural seriousness. This was not left at the level of corridor chatter. Current and former staff were invited, an outside legal team was used, and the palace later said the objectives had been satisfied because lessons had been learned. The fourth category is defensive response. Meghan forcefully denied wrongdoing. Her spokesman called the episode an attack on her character, and CNN recorded the additional legal pushback, which is important because robust denial is not evidence of guilt, but it is evidence that all parties understood the reputational stakes immediately. The fifth category is secrecy as evidence. The palace refused publication not because nothing existed, but because HR matters involving individuals were said to be private. That means there is no honest basis tonight for anyone to claim possession of a public palace report spelling out a formal finding against Meghan. Yet there is equally no honest basis to claim there was no substantive internal review. The sixth category is the institutional context, and here the numbers matter. The royal household's 2021-22 financial report showed a sovereign grant of $86.3 million, net expenditure of $102.4 million, and $54.6 million spent on Buckingham Palace reservicing. In plain English, the institution was managing a highly sensitive staff culture dispute while under substantial scrutiny over money, staffing, and the operational legitimacy of the monarchy itself. When an establishment spends at that scale and still revises internal procedures after an outside review, that is not a trifle. It is a governance event. And here is where the story escalates. The most important phrase in all of this is not bullying and it is not smear. It is lessons have been learned. Bureaucracies do not adopt that language lightly. They use it when a process has yielded enough concern to justify change, even if they refuse to tell the public who was vindicated, who was embarrassed, or who was protected. Now watch the chronology because sequence reveals motive better than adjectives ever can. May 19th, 2018, Harry and Meghan marry at Windsor Castle. October 2018, according to later reporting summarized by Reuters, a senior aide raises a complaint alleging staff mistreatment. January 8th, 2020, Harry and Meghan announce they will step back as senior royals. March 2020, the Sussexes leave active senior royal life and relocate their center of gravity to North America. February 19th, 2021, Buckingham Palace confirms they will not return as working royals, and patronages and honorary military appointments are to be returned. March 2nd, 2021, The Times report surfaces allegations from former staff. March 3rd, 2021, Buckingham Palace publicly announces an internal HR review. March 7th, 2021, the Oprah interview airs in the United States. March 8th, 2021, the interview airs in the United Kingdom. March 2021 through 2022, past and present staff are invited to participate and an outside legal team is used. June 29th, 2022, BBC reports the findings will remain private and that confidentiality governs the process. June 30th, 2022, Reuters reports Sir Michael Stevens saying the review is complete and policy recommendations have been taken forward. June 30th, 2022, again in the financial context, the same reporting cycle places the matter against a public institutional ledger showing $86.3 million in sovereign grant support and $102.4 million in net expenditure. That is the pattern. Not a single night of tabloid noise, but a multi-year sequence in which allegation became review, review became reform, and reform was sealed from public inspection. Notice what is repeated: institution first, disclosure last. This is why the claim that Meghan was named in a report must be handled with prosecutorial precision. She was plainly the subject of allegations that triggered the review, but the report itself was not released, and no responsible analyst can pretend to quote conclusions the public has never seen. That restraint matters because it separates analysis from propaganda. The legal consequences are narrower than sensationalists pretend, but more serious than casual observers admit. There is no public criminal charge here, no Crown Prosecution Service filing, and no judicial finding that Meghan committed unlawful harassment. This was an HR review, not an indictment, but if comparable facts were ever litigated in open court, several statutes and doctrines would immediately come into view. Section 1 of the Protection from Harassment Act 1997, which prohibits a course of conduct amounting to harassment. Section 95 of the Employment Rights Act 1996, which sets out circumstances in which an employee is dismissed and underpins constructive dismissal analysis. Section 26 of the Equality Act 2010, which defines harassment related to a protected characteristic, and Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, which imposes a duty on employers to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health, safety, and welfare at work of employees. To be fair, the public record available tonight does not establish those legal thresholds were met, but the statutes explain why a palace, an employer, and an outside legal team would treat staff allegations with procedural gravity. The consequence already proven is institutional. Policies and procedures were changed. The consequence not yet proven is personal, whether any individual was privately criticized, exonerated, or merely managed out of future risk. From that point, 4 outcome scenarios present themselves. Scenario 1 is continued containment, the most establishment-friendly outcome. The review remains private. The palace never publishes detailed findings, and the institution relies on procedural reform as a substitute for public transparency. Scenario 2 is selective disclosure through secondary channels. A former staffer, aide, lawyer, or memoirist eventually reveals fragments, not enough for full adjudication, but enough to reignite the matter and force comparative scrutiny of palace culture under both Sussex and post-Sussex management. Scenario 3 is adversarial spillover, renewed accusations, renewed denials, perhaps defamation threats or employment-linked claims in another forum, turning a sealed HR matter into collateral litigation over credibility, documentation, and motive. Scenario 4 is the most damaging for everyone involved. Broader institutional unsealing by accumulated pressure, whether through coordinated leaks, competing books, or cross-jurisdictional disclosure tied to other legal disputes, at which point the monarchy would face the worst of both worlds, years of secrecy followed by incomplete disclosure that satisfies no one and discredits everyone. Of those four, the most probable remains Scenario 1 with periodic eruptions of Scenario 2, because the palace has already shown its preference for private management and because the Sussex response has consistently treated the allegations as maliciously timed. That combination produces stalemate, not catharsis, which brings the analysis to its final and most uncomfortable conclusion. The breaking element in this story is not that the public has suddenly received a damning new palace report. It is that the archival record, when reconstructed with discipline, shows something arguably more revealing. Buckingham Palace confirmed an investigation, used an outside legal process, altered procedures, informed participants of the outcome, and withheld the findings. That is not exoneration, it is not conviction, it is institutional quarantine. So if viewers want serious commentary on what power protects, what it discloses, and what it buries, they should subscribe now because the next phase of this story will not be driven by press releases but by pressure. And here is the question for the audience tonight. Should the palace keep the review sealed in the name of confidentiality, release a redacted version in the name of accountability, or draw a final line and say the reforms are all the public is entitled to know? Type sealed, redacted, or full release in the comments. Because the next investigation will examine the one issue this entire affair points toward but never resolves. What exactly changed inside palace staffing and disciplinary procedures after June 2022, and whether those reforms tell a more incriminating story than the hidden report itself?